Hi, welcome to another edition of a Global Network live stream. It's our new show called Space Alert that's going to air every month. The Global Network was created in 1992 to prevent the arms race from moving into space. Uh, Please remember to support the show by clicking the like button and subscribing to our YouTube channel. If you click the icon that shows a bell, you can be notified every time we upload a new video. You can participate in the live stream by leaving a comment in the comment section. Feel free to ask any questions. And also, if you want to get involved, please visit our website, spaceforpeace.org. We'd love to organize with you. We thank Global Network board member Will Griffin for doing all the tech work to make this show possible. Our guest today is my longtime friend, Lisa Savage from Solon, Maine. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to see you. I noticed in the preliminary time we were on here getting ready that this piece of art behind you. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, let me see if I can make it so folks can see a little bit better. A good friend of mine, the artist Tamar Ettingen, made this print some years ago. It remains just as relevant today. It's called The Quagmire, and as you can see, it shows a sort of muscle-bound dude with stars and stripes on his bathing suit stuck in the oil. I think we're still just as stuck in the oil. COP26 got us more stuck in the oil, but as you know, Bruce, I'm a great believer in working with our artist friends to create visuals and use visuals to get our message across.
Right.
Some people learn better through words or videos like this. Some people like to read articles, and a picture's worth 1,000 words.
That's for sure. Lisa, why don't we start by you telling us a bit more about yourself, your background and such?
Sure. I am from Maine. I'm just retired from school teaching, 25 years in central Maine. I'm a grandmother, and that's a big motivation for my organizing. I've been organizing around anti-militarism, climate impact, climate impacted by militarism for the past several years, and just recently moving more into the realm of space impact on climate. And I'm a founding member of the Maine Natural Guard. That's a website where you can take a pretty simple pledge to connect the dots between climate harm and militarism. Because when people talk about security, they're usually talking about increasing the already gargantuan Pentagon budget. But, really, we should point out, well, isn't climate crisis the biggest security threat that we're all facing right now? And then when people talk about the military, the military is framed as being a victim of climate crisis rather than ever telling the truth that it's actually a big driver of climate crisis. So just helping folks connect those dots is what the Maine Natural Guard is all about. And I have been collecting any research or reporting on that research that I could find over the years about the military's impact on climate. Very hard to find. There's more of it now than there used to be. But as you know, Bruce, research on space programs climate impact is very, very sparse at this point.
And we're going to talk about that today. But first, I want to also say that you ran for the United States Senate seat against our incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins.
I did.
Last November. We were very proud of you. You were in how many debates? 4, I think.
4 debates and blocked from a 5th.
That's right.
When people stop me in the street, the thing they most often mention are those debates because, they were televised. 2 of them were on C-SPAN, so nationally televised. And what people often say to me is, you were the only one answering the questions, or I thought you won those debates. And really, Bruce, it was a lot of hard work. You worked very, very hard on the campaign too, as did several others. But to me, all that effort was worth it. Not because we got 5% of the votes in the first round, and that was gratifying. But the real thing was to be able to say some truths about U.S. foreign policy, about how that does impact the climate crisis, about how we, how our budgets are moral documents and what the U.S. prioritizes, which is death over life. It was really worth it to me to be able to say those things on nationwide television. Those are the type of truths that, you know, the corporate media have just blocked out. You cannot hear them on corporate media or in corporate print. So
Well,
yeah.
we were very proud of you, Lisa. You did great.
Thank
You did
you.
us proud.
Couldn't have done it without you.
You recently represented the Global Network along with Kuhan Peck Mander from Hawaii on a People's Summit webinar that we did jointly with Veterans for Peace during the Glasgow Climate Change Summit. You and Kuhan both spoke about the impacts on climate of the space program, something that, as you said a minute ago, is rarely ever talked about. What did you learn from that process?
Well, I learned quite a bit because I had not focused on space much. I know that you have been for years, and you know, the Global Network was quite prescient and focusing on that decades ago when seeing that that was the direction that militarism was going to take. You know, I'm coming more from a K-12 education context in recent years. And in those contexts, space programs are just the best thing that's ever happened. There's lots and lots of propaganda aimed at very young children that shows astronauts of many colors and genders doing interesting and fun work in space. And there's never a whisper that any of NASA's programs are military in nature. But as I know from the Global Network that you've been paying attention for a long time, and really technology developed by NASA is inevitably used by the Pentagon, various branches of the military. For instance, drone warfare really could not be conducted without satellites in space. And even before our former president, the demagogue with bad hair, started Space Force, and our current president kept it, the NASA and the Pentagon were, working together, even if their PR campaigns show nothing of the sort to the American taxpayer. So I did a lot of searching for any research that was available on climate impacts of space programs. And there was very little that I was able to find. Now, granted, I'm not an academic. I'm not a university professor. So some of that research may be in peer-reviewed academic publications that the general public doesn't have access to. A next step for me would really be working with a good research librarian that has access to those kind of platforms to see what they could find. I did find a group, it's both in the US and UK, it's a research group headed up by a professor of geography named Eloise Marais at the University College of London. And she has a research group in collaboration with some others there, Dr. Robert Ryan there, and then Dr. Seb Eastham of MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and then Chloe Balhachet at the University of Cambridge. And these researchers have, in fact, studied the rocket launches that various nations have made and collected data on what kind of fuel they're using, because that has a lot of influence on how much the carbon or other greenhouse gas emissions are, type of fuel. And also space debris, which is something that we probably have heard of, and we're certainly aware that, gosh, there's a lot of stuff orbiting around up there, some of it still in use, some of it not. But space debris causes climate harm when it falls back into the upper atmosphere and burns up. So that was an interesting thing that I learned. It seems
that all those electronics are made with various toxic substances, so that when that burns up on reentry, it creates a real stew of toxins that get into the environment that we then breathe in. Not many people think about that.
No, I don't think they do. I'm always interested in information control, and that was the topic that I took in the COP26 People Summit presentation. It's a hard thing to report on because, of course, you can't read everything or be everywhere watching every channel. So I used some different methods like different search engines, and putting in different search terms to just see what would come up when I tried to find, space plus climate impacts and that kind of thing. It was very, very similar to what I've been finding for years when I try to search for articles on military plus climate impacts. The space programs are the victims of climate crisis. They are the victims of space debris. They are going to be struggling to continue their programs, which are always, depicted as being like this great benefit to humankind, and climate as potentially disruptive to their programs. And never is it really laid out that, well, they also cause a fair amount of climate harm with all these rocket launches. I did notice that whenever a rocket launch or space program is called out for environmental harms of any kind, including climate, they are always focused on those billionaire show-off space programs rather than NASA or another nation's space program.
And we should tell people that I've known this for years. I've been hearing it. Remember, I used to live in Florida, about an hour away from the Kennedy Space Center. And NASA has long been admitting that every mission they fly is dual use. Every single mission is both civilian and military technology development at the same time. So there's no doubt about that. Well, let's move on to another question. Who knows about the climate impacts of the space program and the military in general? Who cares? And why is there so much silence around this important issue?
Yeah, those are very pertinent questions. I don't think much of anybody, again, outside of academia, knows about the climate impacts of space programs based on what I could find. Again, academics can only do research if they can receive funding for that research, because they've got to, get graduate students or post docs to do that work and so forth. So I would guess that funding is hard to come by, as reflected by the fact that you don't see a lot of that kind of research coming up. Military and climate, if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, Bruce, I would have said hardly anybody knows about that either. But in the last several years, that has changed. As you know, when the coalition of the parties, the International Climate Conference, met in Kyoto in the 90s, the U.S. military negotiated very, very hard to not have military emissions counted in a nation's emissions, which is ridiculous. The Earth's atmosphere is not patriotic. It does not care which nation is pumping greenhouse gas emissions out. But they were successful in getting that military of any nation being counted. Then in the Paris Accords, it became optional. I would say this year, COP26 in Glasgow is the first time that I've been aware that there was a major international push to include military emissions. There were a couple of petitions signed by a lot of scientists, international scientists, and the People's Summit, which was organized as a parallel event to the COP26 in Glasgow, and had some in-person events and had also some virtual events that I participated in. There was a fair amount of attention paid to militarism and climate. One of the best researchers I'm aware of who knows the facts about at least the war on terror's impact on climate is Dr. Nita Crawford of Boston University. She works with the Costs of War project at Brown University, and we were lucky to have her in Maine a couple of years ago, and I got to hear her present her research. She said right off, you can't find data on this from the Department of Defense, but what you can find is data on fuel consumption. So I used that fuel consumption data to extrapolate what the greenhouse gas emissions were for the war on terror. And then the Cost of War project has this great website called the costofwar.org, I believe. There's a .com. I don't know. I'd have to check. And they publish very user-friendly, aimed at a regular reading audience, not academic researchers. And they create infographics that help present the information in a way that, regular people can compare it to something like, well, how many cars would that be, or so forth. So I know that lots of other organizations besides Global Network and besides the Maine Natural Guard are paying attention to this. World Beyond War has done a lot of work on this recently. There was just a webinar last night that I missed with the Institute for Policy Studies and Code Pink presenters talking about military climate impact on climate. So the word's getting out. There's more out there. People that are interested in looking for the collection of resources that I've been making, I used to only add a couple a year. Now I can add 2 or 3 a month when I find articles on this topic, can search for Maine Natural Guard. This is how the algorithms of search engines are, tweaked to make sure that it's the official line that gets out and not the alternative information that people like you and I like to share. Is the first hit you'll get is Maine National Guard. Because if you typed in Maine Natural Guard, you must mean the branch of the Army. But if you look at the second or third hit on your search engine, it should be Maine Natural Guard. And there's a tab called Resources. And I have been keeping in reverse chronological order all the articles and research that I find about climate impacts and militarism. I guess I need to start adding climate impacts of space programs in there too now.
That would be good. Let's talk about the ozone layer and briefly, and how with each launch, Elon Musk and Bezos and a lot of these other space entrepreneurs are asking for permission from the FAA to launch up to 80,000 mini satellites for 5G that would be orbiting the Earth, and 24/7, every single person on the planet would have a 5G satellite over their head. As it turns out, 5G also is a major military program that will allow them to have quicker surveillance and targeting applications. So anyway, imagine all of these launches, so many launches that they're building more launch facilities around the world because there aren't enough of them to keep up with the demand. But each one of these launches then, on some level, is punching a hole in the ozone layer, exacerbating climate crisis. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think damage to the ozone layer is the area of space programs, climate harms that I saw the most research about. Perhaps because damage to the ozone layer was a hot topic decades ago and one of the initial things that people were paying attention to in terms of climate. So there may be more awareness about it and there may be more people studying it or having the means to study it. We made a lot of progress as humans, did we not, in fixing the hole in the ozone layer by realizing that some of the things that we were doing that were harmful to it we could substitute other things that weren't. But the thing that worries me the most about that, Bruce, is space programs have such a raw presence in the national mindset. They're never questioned. They're always good and exciting. Dave Webb of the Global Network had interviewed some workers at a radar station in Britain somewhere and asked them, why did you take this assignment, to come work on the space program? And they said things like, it's new technology and it's an exciting field and it's an area of exploration. Well, again, I'm not a rocket scientist, I'm a history major. And when I hear age of exploration, I think, oh, great, genocide, environmental destruction, that we may not be able to pull back from. The age of exploration, from my perspective, means Europeans overrunning indigenous cultures that were doing a great job of living sustainably in their spot on Earth, understanding that, the earth, the soil, the air, the rivers, the lakes, those are our relations. We are deeply connected to them, and humans cannot prosper if we treat them like commodities to be exploited. And I fear that space programs have, now outer space is a commodity to be exploited. And again, that's something that you've been paying attention to for a long time.
Well, that's a really important point you make because it started really in the 15th century with European powers getting in their ships, going and looking, as you said, for the New World resources, new markets, controlling indigenous cultures, killing many of them. Um, and now they're poised to move that into space. And we see this growing competition between the US and other countries for control of the pathway on and off the planet Earth. And now there's talk about competition for bases on the moon, because whoever controls the moon can help it can help them control the pathway on and off the planet Earth into space to go out and mine the sky. So it looks to me like we're duplicating that, what I call the bad seed, of greed and war and environmental degradation. We're now poised to take that into the heavens with us.
Yes, it's very concerning. I sound like a broken record, but I often say, let's put the indigenous grandmothers back in charge of how to live on the earth. I'm not saying that only the indigenous grandmothers understand what to do, but traditionally, especially many of the indigenous groups in, sort of the part of North America I live in, they would choose a leader who was good at hunting and good at sharing and cared for all the people. But it was the grandmother council who could remove that leader if they decided amongst themselves by consensus that person had hubris had turned them into not a good leader, but sort of someone pursuing their own ego goals. I mean, pursuing your own ego goals is practically the definition of what passes for leadership under the system of government we're living in. And these billionaires who've been allowed to, even during a deadly pandemic, worldwide pandemic, have been allowed to amass more and more and more wealth as, millions more become homeless and don't have health care and don't have enough to eat. Why would we glorify someone who's blasting off into space in those contexts? And it almost seems like a parody to me, Bruce, but I know they're serious when these billionaires with the space program say things like, oh, well, the Earth is kind of used up and kind of dirty. And, we're going to build a brave new world off the planet where people can prosper. And I mean, what kind of dystopian hell would that be? Are they serious that that's how human beings would want to live? Maybe it's just me from living in the beautiful Wabanaki homeland where the water is still relatively clean, the sky is still relatively blue, and animals are wandering through my yard every day. But I can't imagine anything more horrible than my grandchildren being doomed to live that kind of life. I think it's a cover-up. It's kind of a it's a good publicity campaign for them to become more wealthy.
And they're looking for recruits to go out and person the mining colonies that they hope to establish on the moon, where they say there's helium-3 and water, and on Mars, where they say there's magnesium and cobalt and uranium. Already, Halliburton Corporation has developed a drilling mechanism for mining on Mars. Those rovers driving around that NASA says are looking for the origins of life on Mars. Actually, they're doing soil sampling, trying to find out where the best minerals are located on the planet for eventual mining colonies. Some years ago, when I lived in Florida, there was a big conference at the Space Center. I went, and I wanted to go to a workshop on Mars because I really wanted to get a sense of what the plan was for mining Mars. And as it turned out, the guy running the workshop was the director of the tourist center at the Kennedy Space Center. And I thought, what does he know about Mars? And his whole workshop was, we're redoing the entire Space Center tourist facility on a Mars theme. And we're bringing in all these school-age kids from throughout Central Florida, because in 20 years, they're going to be taxpayers. And we want them to support all the expenditures for this Mars mining process, that's all corporate driven. So really, that's where they're all coming from. We've got just a few minutes left. I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
We heard, getting back to Glasgow, we heard that no scientists were invited to speak at this summit, at this COP26 summit, which astounds me. But at the same time, fossil fuel corporation lobbyists were invited in droves. What does that tell us?
You know, that narrative control is the name of the game. Most human beings are not as interested in current events as you and I are. Most human beings are trying to make a living, get snow tires on the car, make sure they've got enough firewood in, and get their children fed and educated. So the narrative that is promoted and that just effortlessly flows through all these communication channels is the one that most people are going to accept and probably not question a great deal. I always get to the point where I'm like, well, narrative can take you pretty far, but once someone's, teeth are rotting and they can't afford to go to the dentist, or they're watching a family member that they love suffer in that kind of pain, what narrative can trick them into thinking that the priorities of our government are correct? An issue I've been working on a lot since the campaign is universal health care, because it was clear to me that people here in Maine, that was their number one issue. And people often say, how could we be the only, rich country and among many other much poorer countries that has no universal health care? Well, I think you've just explained it perfectly, Bruce. We spend our treasure on these glorified military space or, terrestrial programs, and that's supposed to make us feel like the exceptional Americans who rule the planet and now the outer space. And it's supposed to make us forget that we can't go to the doctor. Or, of course, a lot of the narrative has always been, if you don't have medical care or dental care, you are a personal failure. Late stage capitalism is always sending out this message like, oh, that's a personal failure of yours. Well, it isn't. It's a systemic problem. But publicity, propaganda works because it tells people, just look at this, look at the world through this tiny little opening. And what you see through there, that's the only thing worth looking at. Everything outside that little opening, it's either false or it's not really significant. So pay no attention to that.
So how do we get around this current situation that humanity finds ourselves in today?
Well, just what we're doing, I think, sharing what we know and listening a lot, listening deeply to others who have information that we don't have, connecting and networking with those others. I know that people that went to Glasgow were completely overwhelmed in a good way by marching with hundreds of thousands of mostly young people and many indigenous people, many young indigenous people in the streets of Glasgow, and feeling the passion and the dedication of those people to not go home and get back to business as normal, but to keep on the case here. So sharing our information, being in community with one another, and the show that you and Will are doing is part of that work. So thank you for doing that.
Well, we're really glad to have you. We've got about a minute and a half left. You want to say anything in closing to the listeners?
Well, I do want to say that I have been writing op-eds, letters to the editor, running for elected office, protesting, getting arrested when weapon systems are being launched. I've tried lots and lots of ways to get the word out, and I will continue doing that. Many of my grandchildren are now right there with me in spirit and sometimes in body. But I've always said my target audience, and maybe this is just my school teacher background, my target audience when I'm standing by the roadside with a sign, that says, defund the Pentagon, biggest polluter on the planet, or whatever, is some child in the back seat who's got their mouth open. They're watching us going by, and they're just about to go, Mom, what are those people doing? Mom may not say anything positive about what we're doing, but the question has been asked, and that child is noticing, hey, somebody's questioning the narrative here. So, let's keep doing that.
All right. It just goes to show how important it is for us to be out on the street, because they can close down the media all they want. But as long as we can stand on a street corner with a sign, we're going to see the American people, because they're all driving by in their cars at some point in time. Lisa, thank you very much. And thanks for watching another edition of Space Alert. We'll do another show next month with another guest from a different part of the world talking about these space issues. Until then, good luck to everybody, and please get organized. In the meantime, please share this video and like it, and check out our website, spaceforpeace.org. Bye-bye.